This movie follows a poor but beautiful girl whose boss crosses the line and takes advantage of her. But the ending is something you'd never expect. So, let's begin the movie. But before that, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss out on our next romance story. The movie begins with the main character, Lee, who is seen with a rope tied around her hands. In that condition, she takes some documents from an office and walks toward a room. Then the story jumps back 6 months earlier, showing the events that led to this moment. At that time, Lee was in a mental hospital, where she was receiving treatment. Today, she's finally being discharged. She remembers that today is her sister's wedding day. Just then, her mother arrives to pick her up, and Lee goes home with her. At the wedding, Lee stands quietly in one corner, not talking much. A guy named Peter walks up to her and asks how she's been. Peter was her high school friend, and this was the first time they had seen each other in years. After a bit of talking, Peter takes Lee to the dance floor. Meanwhile, Lee's father has had too much to drink, and his behavior makes her very uncomfortable. Feeling upset, Lee goes to her room and takes out a box full of sharp objects from under her bed. She is about to hurt herself when she suddenly stops, lost in thought. We learn that Lee's parents used to fight a lot and constantly shouted and insulted each other. Whenever she got overwhelmed by their fights, Lee used to harm herself. One time, she accidentally cut her hand too deeply, which scared her parents so much that they admitted her to a mental hospital for treatment. In the next scene, we see Lee learning to type so she can get a job. She goes around to different places, attending interviews, but no one hires her. One day, she notices a newspaper ad for a secretary position at a law office. The ad was placed by a lawyer named Mr. Gray. Excited, Lee immediately goes to his office for an interview. When she enters, the place looks messy, with papers scattered all over the floor. There's also another secretary there, angrily packing her belongings. Lee tries to talk to her, but the woman ignores her and leaves without saying a word. After that, Lee walks into Mr. Gray's office. At first, Gray barely pays attention to her, which makes Lee nervous and disappointed. She starts to leave, but he stops her and begins the interview. He asks her questions about her relationship status, family address, and work experience. Lee shows him her typing certificate and other qualifications. After looking at them, Gray tells her that she's actually overqualified for this job and might get bored working there. But Lee tells him honestly that she doesn't have any other options right now and really needs this job. Hearing this, Gray decides to hire her, and Lee is absolutely thrilled. One day, Mr. Gray tells Lee that he has thrown away an important file. He thought he wouldn't need it anymore, but now he needs it back at any cost. He asks Lee to find it for him. Lee immediately starts searching for the file while Gray secretly watches her, curious to see how serious she is about her work. After some time, Lee finds the file in the trash bin. But when she brings it to Gray, he calmly tells her that he doesn't need it anymore. He already had a copy and had simply forgotten about it. A little later, Gray tells Lee that there are too many rats in the office and asks her to place a net in one of the corners to catch them. Since she can't quite reach the corner, Lee bends down to do it. Gray watches her closely the entire time, his gaze lingering on her. Just then, the office phone starts ringing, and Lee goes to answer it. At that moment, Gray's ex-wife suddenly storms into the office, clearly furious. She starts shouting his name loudly, demanding to see him. Hearing her voice, Gray quickly hides inside the closet of his cabin. When Lee comes to call him, he whispers for her to tell his ex-wife that he's not there, that he's gone out for work. Following his instructions, Lee lies and tells the woman that Gray isn't in the office. But instead of leaving, Gray's ex-wife decides to wait for him to return. While she's waiting, Lee gets a phone call from her father and begins talking to him. Since Lee is distracted, Gray's ex-wife becomes even more irritated. Out of anger, she damages Lee's overcoat and storms out of the office. At the same time, Lee's father ends the call because she had kept him on hold for too long. Feeling upset and overwhelmed by everything, Lee takes a small knife from her purse and is about to hurt herself again. But Gray sees her doing this. Realizing that he's watching, Lee quietly puts the knife away and gets back to work. After finishing her work that evening, Lee goes to a laundromat cafe, where she happens to meet Peter. The two sit down and have dinner together, talking and laughing like old friends. While they're still talking, Gray also arrives at the laundromat with some clothes. From a distance, he sees Lee and Peter kissing each other. The sight makes him uncomfortable and jealous, so he silently gets back into his car and drives away. The next day at work, Gray starts pointing out mistakes in Lee's typing. He tells her that he's been noticing errors for quite some time and that he can't tolerate them anymore. Then, out of nowhere, he begins criticizing her outfit too, saying that she should dress more like a modern secretary. In the next scene, we see Lee having dinner at Peter's house. During the meal, Peter's parents casually bring up the topic of marriage between Peter and Lee. The following day, when Lee returns to the office, Gray gives her another task. He tells her that he wants to see how she handles a client's phone call. Lee takes the call confidently and handles it well. But when she's done, Gray tells her that she still needs to speak with a little more confidence next time. Gray tells Lee that her work performance isn't good enough and that this won't work. After that, he suddenly asks her about Peter. Lee honestly tells him that she went on a date with Peter the other day. Then Gray changes the topic and asks her what she was planning to do with the night that day. Lee stays silent and doesn't give him an answer. Gray then explains gently that he knows she uses self-harm as a way to release her anger, but he tells her that this can't continue forever. He makes her promise that she will never hurt herself again. Lee feels touched by his concern. It's the first time she realizes that someone actually cares about her. Over time, Lee also changes her appearance and starts dressing differently. Gray begins to notice her more and more, and he starts liking her too. One day, Lee makes a small typing mistake. Gray gets furious and scolds her harshly. After that, he calls her into his office, tells her to close the door, and orders her to bend down. Then, he begins to spank her as punishment. To Gray's surprise, Lee doesn't resist. She actually enjoys it. And the rope we saw tied around her hands at the beginning of the movie, that was also part of one of her punishments, given by Gray after she made another typing mistake. Now, Gray starts taking full control over Lee's life. What she eats, what she wears, and even who she talks to. Lee becomes completely attached to him. She feels happiest whenever she's being punished by Gray. At night, when she lies in bed, she can't stop thinking about him. She dreams about him and his punishments, finding strange comfort and pleasure in those thoughts. One day, Lee tries to seduce Gray, but he's too focused on his work and ignores her advances. Feeling rejected, Lee leaves the office angrily and goes home. Around the same time, her father is hospitalized from drinking too much alcohol. Meanwhile, Gray also starts becoming distant from Lee, barely giving her any attention. All of this makes her feel deeply depressed, and she begins thinking about hurting herself again. But then, she remembers the promise she made to Gray, never to harm herself again. So instead, she tries to fill that emptiness another way. She goes to Peter and tries to get intimate with him, but it doesn't satisfy her. Peter can't make her feel what she felt with Gray, and she leaves feeling even more frustrated. The next day, Lee once again tries to get close to Gray. This time, Gray can't resist her persistence. He calls her into his office, ready to give in to the temptation. But before anything happens, Peter suddenly arrives. He reminds Lee that they had plans to go out for dinner that night and came to pick her up. Lee tells him that she has too much work to do and refuses to go. Disappointed, Peter quietly leaves. After he's gone, Lee completely gives herself to Gray, but instead of touching her, he just watches her, taking pleasure from her presence. Craving satisfaction, Lee goes to the washroom to finish by herself. Gray had done the same thing with all his previous secretaries. The next day, he suddenly fires Lee. Shocked and heartbroken, Lee asks him why, but Gray doesn't give her any clear answer. Devastated, Lee leaves his office in tears. Days pass, but Lee still can't stop thinking about Gray. She misses him deeply and can't move on. Then one day, Peter unexpectedly proposes to her. Feeling lost and unsure, Lee agrees to marry him without much thought. On the day of her wedding, Lee shows up at Gray's office wearing her wedding gown. When Gray sees her, he tells her coldly that he doesn't love her and that she should forget everything that happened between them. But Lee refuses to listen. So Gray tells her to put her hands flat on his desk and wait there until he returns. Lee quietly does exactly as he says. Even as night falls, Gray still doesn't come to her. From outside his office, he secretly watches her, curious to see how long she'll wait for him. After a while, he calls the phone in his office, but Lee doesn't pick it up. She keeps her hands firmly on the desk, not moving even an inch. Meanwhile, Peter comes looking for her. He finds Lee still waiting at Gray's desk and asks what she's doing there on her wedding day. Lee calmly tells him that she's not going to marry him. Confused and hurt, Peter asks why she agreed to marry him in the first place if she didn't mean it. Soon, Peter and Lee's family also arrive, begging her to come home. But Lee ignores everyone and continues waiting for Gray. From his office window, Gray watches everything silently. Days go by like this. Lee stays in the same position, waiting for him. Her story spreads all over the media, and people gather outside the office to see her. Finally, after several days, Gray comes back to her. He gently feeds her with his own hands and takes her home. There, he bathes her and takes care of her lovingly. Afterward, they finally become intimate. In time, Lee and Gray get married. They build a life together and live happily with each other. And with that, the movie Secretary, 2012, ends on a happy note.